Hey Plymouth Park UMC, it's Marcus, and today I'm joined by Mike Harris, our lay leader and ministry council's chair. We have an important meeting coming up at the end of January, Sunday, January 25th, after our worship services. We'll have a lunch after church and have a church conference, an all-church meeting where we'll approve this year's budget and approve our leaders for the coming year. And we wanted to have a conversation about all of that work because we want you to be prayerfully and intentionally thinking about it, have time to come up with questions, or just make sure that you feel fully engaged as possible so you're not just showing up and seeing these numbers and for the first time and all those kind of things. So we have been so blessed this year. We had a great not capital campaign, sorry, we're not doing a capital campaign, but our stewardship, our generosity conversations to build our budget. We are really glad to see the response we had this year. We've had increases from the number of folks who have been willing to make an estimate of giving, increases per household in what those estimates are looking like, and we're able to increase this year's income projections to closer to around $840,000 to $850,000. That is an amazing sign of health for our church. That means in this year, last year we had a budget where we could not put money in the budget to include things like youth and kids and worship, and we're able to add money back into that. Now, that does mean we have expenses for this year, and we want to give you a heads up that expense range could be somewhere between $950,000 and $960,000. So I understand that's a deficit of anywhere from $100,000 to $110,000. There's hope for all of those kind of things. We're not looking at that to say, oh my goodness, how are we going to manage those kind of things? But we do want to be transparent about that. We want to talk with you as a church family about how we plan to address those things and invite us all to navigate those realities. Mike, do you want to talk a bit about those numbers?
Absolutely. As Marcus said, we want you to know up front and be transparent about these numbers. So the purpose of this is to give you time to think about it so that you're not caught off guard when you show up to the church conference. The budget is a piece of paper with numbers written on it that we have to put out, we have to approve, we have to vote on, all those things. But there's some reality to what's really behind those numbers that the sheet doesn't say. And so that's what I want to try to explain a little bit. As Marcus said, that there's about a $30,000 increase in our projected income, which is amazing. You may remember last year at this time, whenever I was talking to you about our expenses and our budget, we had $0 in our budget for children's youth or music other than the choral scholars, the musicians, things like that. So other than salaries, there was no money in our budget for programming because we knew we were going to be spending some of those designated monies that were in our savings account, basically. Well, we don't have that same savings account because we did exactly what we expected to do in 2025 and we spent out of our savings account. Yeah. So, but because of the increased giving, pledges and everything, we're going to be able to put about $30,000 worth of programming expenses back into our budget. So that essentially makes up the difference in that increased income through the diligence of our staff and through Carol Jones and her amazing work and all that she does. The grand total of income is grand total of expenses is only around $15,000. So
of that increase from last year, yeah.
Absolutely. So we have an increase of $30,000 in our income, an increase of $15,000 in our expenses, and that puts all of our programming monies back to where they were before. Yeah. So that's very exciting. But the reality is the income number is less than the expense number on paper. But as long as I've been going here, I think that's always been the case.
It's been the case since before I was the pastor here at Plymouth Park, but we also want to handle those conversations as transparently and as openly as possible. We're not giving you a list of just hopes and dreams. We're giving you a list of ways we plan to do ministry. Now, some of that we've realized the last couple of years, we've had choices to make. We've had to choose between massively increased property insurance expenses. We've had apportionments that we had hoped to be able to pay, but when insurance increases so much and we have building needs and things like that, what's left to do ministry? And we'd rather not think about what's left over to do ministry. We'd rather say we're a church called to do ministry. So we want to choose to do ministry and pay for our building and things, and if we're able to, then honor our obligations as a United Methodist congregation. What are the numbers around that?
So kind of, once again, the numbers are still coming in, so exact numbers I don't have for you, but essentially let's call it $100,000 difference between our expenses and our income. So if that's kind of the sort of the worst case scenario, like Mark said, we want to, but if we are unable to pay our apportionments again, that's about 50,000. Actually, I think about 53,000.
53,000.
You know, so almost half of our difference can be made up right then with the apportionments. We don't know yet what our insurance costs. Our insurance runs April through March, and so we don't know. Anecdotally, from hearing from some other churches and what their insurance has done, we're hopeful that our insurance rates are actually going to drop $20,000, maybe even $30,000.
We hope. We've heard that from other churches that have had similar problems, like our floods or winter storms or roof repairs, our plumbing repairs, and we've been proactive to do repairs that'll help in the long run. So we do anticipate some savings. We just don't know the range on that yet.
Exactly. So that's kind of optimistic, but because we don't know, we have to budget the full amount. So that full amount is what will be shown on, once again, that piece of paper that we have to pass out and talk about. Then there's also, nowhere on the budget will you see garage sale.
Right.
Okay. That's not a line item that we put on there. We know it happens. We know it happens every year. We're very thankful for what it does.
Yes. And thank you, Karen Dindy and Diane Mannon, for leading us in that charge.
Absolutely. So there's typically the last few years that's been 20,000 plus that can go towards that deficit as well. And then there's always some legacy giving that happens in the year. But that's something that we can't budget. We never know what that amount's going to be, if it's going to happen at all, and so forth. But those numbers. Last year I talked to you about even worst case scenario, we could meet our deficit with our savings. We don't have that same amount of savings, but once again, I'm saying even kind of worst case scenario, we will be able to overall, our total expenses at the end of the year and our total income at the end of the year will be very, very, very close, if not exactly the same.
And the reality of those things is what is on the budget is also different than what's maybe in our balance sheet and our cash flow. Neither Mike or I are accountants. We are not the accountants of the church, but we know many of you maybe, or you know somebody. But we know there's also the realities of the cash flow of the church. Like when Mike says the garage sale or legacy giving can help with deficits, what we really mean is those funds come in and go actively into either ministry or to emergency funds or back into our savings where we have them as they come. But just because it says on a piece of paper, this much is spent here, this much is spent there, really, a lot of our bills happen that way. Our income does not come in that way. Exactly. And I think it's important for us to know that as a church family about how we expect to navigate these months when the budget may say one thing, or we expected even 12 increments of how we meet those obligations, but that's not really what income really works like in our church.
When I mentioned that we have, putting $30,000 worth of program expenses, 30,000 doesn't divide by 12 and happen once each month. Our children's and youth programming in the summertime is the highest time. That's when we do VBS. That's when we do mission trips. That's when we do all the other programming that we do. However, that June and July, when we do the most programming for that, is also our typical lowest months on income. So it's this roller coaster of when the money's coming in, when the money's going out, and so trying to smooth some of those hills is often a challenge with our cash flow.
And we want to share that with you as a church family because I think it's good for us to consider. As we meet those cash flow things, there is also a lot of hope in that for our church. So one of the things that you may not know is that the average giving per household in our church is around $400. That means that there are not just 2 or 3 individuals who make all of our budget happen and then the rest of everyone's giving is just icing on the cake. No, it means there is really equal across our church investment in what makes all of our ministries happen. If we're doing anything, it's because you are participating in it to make it happen.
Absolutely. And as a former math teacher, that average is not being skewed
Yeah.
by a couple of really big donors at the top.
Yeah.
Our average at the top end is like $2,000 a month.
Yeah, we really have no households that give like $10,000 a month or anything like that. Now, hey, if you have that capacity and want to be that person, come on. Would love your generosity to bless our community through God's love. But I hope you know that whatever amount you give, if you're able to give, it makes a real impact and difference through the ministries of our church. So whatever you're able to give at, you're shoulder to shoulder, side by side in making Plymouth Park United Methodist Church happen.
I was quite surprised when I heard about the $400 per month average, because I find that amazing. I find that very exciting. That I think that speaks to the life of our church.
Absolutely.
How much everyone in our congregation is committed and invested into the ministry of Plymouth Park. And I think that's amazing.
Yeah, and honestly, that also means that your giving goes a long way whenever it happens. There are people who give annually, there are people who give quarterly, there are people who give weekly. Whenever you're able to give, know that it makes a difference. As Mike said, a lot of our program expense happens in the summer, but a lot of our active, ongoing monthly or weekly giving decreases during the summer. So if you're thinking like, oh, well, they won't miss my money that much, or I'll give when I'm there in person, or maybe I'm thinking about setting up that direct deposit or whatever it may be, maybe this is the call that you've been waiting for to think about what it means to help consistently manage those needs as the year goes on. Now, there are still some challenges. You know, there could be things that happen throughout the year without the building that still, I would love to be able to tell you. We have a contingency for every need that's going to happen. I can't tell you that. But I'd rather be honest in telling you that than try to tell you something that's not true. But I also believe what one of my mentors told me a long time ago. We can do all of our planning and all of our numbers in all the right places. We still have to leave room for God to do what God's going to do. Now, Mike and I were talking, and Mike said something pretty true that I thought is worth considering. Unfortunately, God does not fill out a pledge card every year for us. So we would be great if God said, here's exactly what you can expect that I'm going to do. But God is still moving, and part of how God is going to move and show up is how we're going to show up together as a church. It's how we're going to worship together, pray together, serve together, study together, grow together, invite together. All of those things are how God is going to show up and move. And I'm excited to see what that looks like in 2026. And I hope that, in all of this conversation, thank you if you've stuck through to the end. Maybe you should email a response back. Like you said, if you watch this far, say, yay, Jesus, and email it back to me. But we hope that you'll be praying for this work. Pray for your church. Pray for the relationships that we can build in our community, the deepening of our experience of God we can have together. Pray for these numbers and the budgets and everything. And remember, it's not just numbers on a spreadsheet. That's a representation of our investment in the love of God that we share together. So I hope that you'll be prayerful about that, be intentional about it, join the conversation January 25th, and ask your questions. You can reply to this email, this video, wherever you're seeing it. If it's via email or online, email me, marcus@ppumc.org. You can reach out to Mike Harris. You can reach out to Carol Jones, our business manager. We want to make sure we answer all your questions as thoroughly as we can, and we want to be as invested as we can as a church community. Mike, is there anything else you want to offer?
Thank you all so much. Like I say, I'm very excited about the life of our church. I'm excited about the work of our church, and I think great things are coming for us in 2026.
Absolutely. Thank you so much again for all your ongoing generosity, for being the hands and feet of Christ in so many ways. It is a blessing to serve alongside you. Hope to see you soon. Take care. Peace.